Good morning, third grade. Today we're going to continue with fractions. You're going to be seeing problems that are going to ask you to compare fractions with the same denominator. And you're going to see, like example 1, some word problems, example 2, where you're going to have to use a less than, greater than, or equal symbol. Now, before we get into it, when we're comparing fractions that have the same denominator, that means they're broken into the same amount of equal parts, and we're going to actually have to look at our numerator, which is going to tell us how many equal parts are being counted. And remember, the denominator is the bottom number, the numerator is the top number. So problem number 1 says, Jeremy and Christina are each making a quilt block. Both blocks are the same size, and both are made of 4 equal size squares. 2/4 of Jeremy's squares are green, 1/4 of Christina's squares are green. Whose quilt block has more green squares? As a good reader, I will reread. Jeremy and Christina are each making a quilt block. Both blocks are the same size and both are made of 4 equal size squares. 2/4 of Jeremy's squares are green, 1/4 of Christina's squares are green. Whose quilt block has more green squares? So I'm going to draw a little picture, which you can do in your notebook at home. I'm going to draw a picture. I'm going to draw a block. I'm going to break it into fourths. I'm going to put a J above it, so this will represent Jeremy. I'm going to draw another one right here. And now I'm going to break it into fourths as well. I'm going to put a C so we know it's Christina's. Now it told us there are 4 equal size squares, so I know it's broken into fourths. And if we look at our fractions, the denominator is 4, so I also know it is broken into fourths. And the problem says 2/4 of Jeremy's squares are green. So I'm going to shade in 2 of Jeremy's in green. It also says 1/4 of Christina's squares are green, so I'm going to shade in 1/4 of Christina's squares. Now our question is asking us whose quilt block has more green squares. So when I'm looking at this, I can see from the picture Jeremy has more because I have more filled in on Jeremy's. So I know from my picture that Jeremy has more green squares. So drawing the picture is one way that can help me. Now if I was just looking at 2/4 and I was trying to compare it to 1/4, I would look at our numerator, our top number. Since both denominators are 4 and they're equal, that means they're broken into the same equal parts, just how I drew fourths here and fourths here. Now our numerator, our top number, tells us how many equal parts are being counted. So I see that Jeremy is counting 2 equal parts and Christina is counting 1 equal part. So therefore, I know that 2 is greater than 1. So I know that 2/4 is greater than 1/4. And since Jeremy has 2/4 and Christina has 1/4, I know that Jeremy has more green squares. So when we're comparing our fractions with the same denominator or like denominators, we're going to compare using our numerator. Now example problem number 2 is asking us to compare 3/3 and 1/3. So I'm going to do just as I did in the problem before. I see that they have the same denominator, so I'm going to look at the numerator. I see that my numerator in 3/3 is 3, and my numerator in 1/3 is 1. I know that 3 is greater than 1, so I know that 3/3 is greater than 1/3. And then it says, how do you know your answer is correct? I looked at the numerators, and 3 is greater than 1. And we know this because, again, the denominator tells you how many equal parts there are. In this case, we have 3 equal parts and 3 equal parts. And in our fraction 3/3, 3 of those equal parts are being counted. And in our other fraction, only 1/3 of those equal parts is being counted. So again, when you're comparing fractions with like denominators, you will look at the numerators. Whichever number has the greater numerator is the greater fraction.